All right, hello everyone. Let's just start by making sure that everybody can hear me okay. So if you can see me and if you can hear me, say something in the chat to let me know. Awesome. Okay, that looks great. I can see a ton of people talking. So let's just jump into this before we go to slides or anything. My name is Jenny McLean, and I'm going to help you with environmental science. Let's see, let's just go ahead and jump right into slides here. Let me share my screen. All right, there we go. So we're going to talk about the living world today. Just so you know, everything that we're doing is going to be recorded so that we can share it online and you guys can review it later. So you will see this. I'm going to remind you at the start of every stream, but if you are saying anything in chats and your username comes up, people might be able to see that later. So just be cautious of that. If you don't want people to see your name, then you can change it to a fake name. Make sure that you follow us on all of our other social media forums, so Twitter and Instagram and YouTube as well. These are our upcoming streams. So this is really a list of our total streams that we're going to go over together. Our strategy is going to be an overview of every unit. And then once we do that, we're going to look at the free response and how we can tackle those best together and what you need to do in order to score the highest you possibly can on each one of those. And then we will do our 5-hour finale together. So we will go over everything again one last time right before the exam. Today, what we're going to do is we'll do a little bit of intros first. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself and about our TA. And then we're going to dive right into Unit 1 and briefly cover all of the major points. So this is me. My name is Jenny. I am an environmental science teacher. I've been teaching for around 10 years now. I live in Bozeman, Montana. I'm originally from California, but I moved 2 years ago to Montana, and it is amazing here. I love it. I love being outdoors, and that's why moving to Montana was so good for me. There's a lot more opportunities to go outdoors and go hiking, things like that here. And I have a mini golden retriever. Her name is Coda. She wasn't supposed to be a mini. She was supposed to be a regular sized golden retriever, but she was just this teeny little puppy, and she never quite grew up. So she only weighs like 35 pounds. She's like everyone always asks, how old's your puppy? So that's just a little bit about me. Our TA is Miriam. Miriam has moved all over the place. She's lived in Algeria and South Carolina and Montgomery, Alabama. She's really into sustainable fashion, researching and coding. And she loves taking notes and crafty things. So to get to know Miriam a little bit better, that is what we're going to talk about is Discord. So I know a lot of you have already been in Discord and met each other and met Miriam there. But Discord is a way for us to continue talking and to help each other out even when we're not doing an actual live stream. So if you haven't been there yet, please go check it out. It's a way for you to pose questions to either myself or Miriam or other students and to support each other as we get closer to this exam. In addition, we have a ton of study guides for you to see and our review streams from last year that are up on the website. So a lot of different tools in order to help you prepare for this exam. Let's see here. Okay, so as we are moving along, I'm going to be able to ask you different questions. And so we're just going to start with an easy one here. I'm going to open up this poll. So I want to know how everyone is feeling about the APES test. So are you feeling really good about it and you think you're going to be okay? Or are you feeling like you're going to need all of the help as we get closer to this exam? And I will actually pop this up here so you can see how everyone else is feeling. So we're doing pretty good. Some people think we're going to be okay. Some people think we need a ton of help. As we go through it, we're going to be there for each other, and I will hopefully get a lot of information from you guys as far as what you need the most help on, so that I will be able to really target that for you. All right, let's get into it. So, introduction to ecosystems. An ecosystem is all of the available resources, including the water, nutrients, light, and space in any given area, and that will dictate how plants and animals compete in that ecosystem. So a good way to think about ecosystems is to think about all of the biotic and abiotic things that are interacting in any given space. So a abiotic thing is anything that is not alive, and that would be the amount of water somewhere, the amount of sunlight, the temperature. So all of those things interacting with the biotic things, which are going to be the plants and animals, all the living things in that area. And how biotic and abiotic things interact with each other is what's going to create an ecosystem. And so different ecosystems would be like your desert or a forest or different things like that, and how they are different than each other. So you could have two forests who have very similar abiotic factors, and then the different biotic factors in those ecosystems would make them different from one another. All right, and we're going to go over some major terms that we need to know for this first section. Let me see if I can hide that poll for us. I'm still looking at that. There we go. Let's get that poll out of the way. Okay, so a predator is any organism in any given area that is consuming another organism. And prey would be something that is being eaten by that predator. So those are fairly simple terms, something we're really used to. You can think of like a lion and a zebra. Obviously, the lion would be the predator and the zebra would be the prey item. And then under symbiosis, these are some more complicated terms that we don't use in like everyday life. So it's a little bit more tricky to remember exactly what each one means. And I think the emoji strategy here is really best as far as helping you to remember what each term means and how they're different from each other, because it kind of sounds, when you first look at it, like they all are the exact same thing. So those three things are all forms of symbiosis: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. I totally see that I have a typo there. Sorry about that. So mutualism is something that both organisms are going to be really happy about. And an example of mutualism would be like your clownfish and anemone. Both of those organisms are going to benefit from that interaction and be happier with it. And actually, both those organisms would end up dying if their partner died. So they actually need each other. And that's mutualism. So that's our two happy faces. Commensalism is, one is happy, it's really benefiting a lot, and the other one doesn't really care if the other one is there or not. So it's not benefiting from it, and it is not being harmed in any way either. And then the last one is supposed to say parasitism. Parasitism is one that is going to really benefit one organism and is going to harm the other. So a good example of a parasite would be like a tick. So the host is not happy about having the tick on it. It's like taking its blood, and the tick is, very happy about its relationship and how it is taking from the other one. So those are all a little bit different, just in how they react one another, whether or not they're very happy or they don't really mind how they are there. I saw someone say the slides are really slow. Let me see if I can do something about making that better. There we go. Let's see. So that should be a little bit better. Hopefully that made the slides bigger. I saw someone say that they were really small. Hopefully you can see them a little bit better now. I'm trying to get them a little bit bigger even. Awesome. Sorry about that. Okay, hopefully you can see the typing a little bit better now. Okay, so then the next thing, is competition. So all organisms, whether they are plants or animals, are going to be competing constantly in any given space for space, food, water, or a mate. So there's constant competition going on between the different organisms in an ecosystem, even if it may not seem that way kind of from the outside. So they're always trying to get more space, or fit more into an area than they are, compete for food. And if you're thinking about like plants, you might think, well, they might not compete for food, but they really are. They're competing for nutrients in any given area. So they are competing for that, like phosphorus and nitrogen, or the amount of water. Competition also then kind of links into like a limiting factor is another way to talk about that. So like a limiting factor in any given area would be that food, water, space, those kind of same ideas. So that's how a limiting factor is whatever thing you would run out of first that would prevent more of those organisms to live. So an example of that is if you have trees growing and there's only so much sunlight and only the tallest trees are going to get the sunlight, and that's going to limit the ones on the bottom, so that they're run out of it first. And let's see, a limiting factor, I can kind of think of it as a funny way that kind of helps you remember what that term is. Let's think about it as far as laundry. And your limiting factor when you have to do your laundry would be whatever item you completely run out of first, which would force you to do another load of laundry. So let's say you have the least amount of socks and you run out of your socks, and then you'd have to do laundry because you need more socks, even if you have some clean pants left and some clean shirts. So that would be, your socks would be your limiting factor as far as when you have to do laundry. Okay, anyways, resource partitioning is when organisms find a way to get around having to share things. So that is a good example of that is the moth and butterfly. If you really think about it, a moth and a butterfly are the same creature. They are very similar. They have the same like life cycle. They have the same body shapes. They are very, very close. The only real difference between the two is that moths have partitioned in order to live at night. And so they just look a little bit different. They've adapted that way. A lot of times they have different ways of navigating because it's dark. So they're not going to rely on eyesight and flowers as much as like a butterfly would. Maybe they're going to rely on a sense of smell or something else to get around. But moths and butterflies are a really good example of resource partitioning so that they don't have to compete for the same things. Another example would be like birds and bats. They're pretty much the same organism. Functionally speaking, they're small. A lot of times they eat the same things. And they fly around. So in order to not compete directly with each other, they come out at different times. And it doesn't always have to be different times for resource partitioning. Sometimes, certain organisms or certain birds will only, nest maybe at the bottom of trees, whereas other birds will nest at the top. And so they are then partitioning that resource of space and where they are going to live. Okay, so for biomes, and I'll get into this a little bit too, I'm not going to go over every single different type of biome just because we already have a stream of that we go like in depth into each type of biome. And in addition, I don't think that you should spend a huge amount of time memorizing all of the biomes like so specifically. In general, you should know like what causes them to be different and briefly understand how they are different from each other, but I wouldn't spend a huge amount of time like memorizing all these different biomes. So terrestrial biomes, areas on Earth that have different biomes or environments due to their location and the amount of water, temperature, and sunlight they have. Just to break it down a little bit, terrestrial means land, which would be the opposite of like aquatic biomes. And so that's kind of what we're talking about here. You can either have terrestrial or aquatic. And a way to kind of remember those terms is you can either have an aquarium or a terrarium. So if you had an aquarium to keep your fish in, you would have a terrarium to keep your lizard in, because terra is Latin for like earth or dirt. So yeah, that can kind of help you remember it. Terrestrial is land. The things that make these biomes different are going to be based on a few different factors, including kind of where they are and how much water they get is really the biggest factors. When we're talking about different biomes, different words come up like climate and weather. Climate is long-term temperature and precipitation. So that's going to be an average of over 30 years or more. So when we're talking about climate change, in order to say there's been a change, it would have to be an average, you look at 30 years of change in order to make that, a different climate. Weather, on the other hand, changes every single day. So a weather event is something where there's like rain, or if I was talking about weather, I might make a statement like it's 18 degrees outside and snowing in Montana. And you might say the weather in San Diego is 75 and sunny. So that's like weather, but you could say for a climate, say I live in a desert climate, if you lived somewhere in Arizona, and that would be a statement that, on average, it is dry and warm in this area. So that's kind of the difference between climate and weather. And then a biome that is the given climate of an area and the plants and animals that have adapted to live there. So you could say that the climate in a certain area creates a forest, but the different forests are different due to the animals and plants that live there, or maybe the specific amount of water that one forest gets. So although some of them are similar, they are going to be different based on the different organisms that have adapted to live there. So the major types of terrestrial biomes are the taiga, temperate rainforest, temperate seasonal forest, tropical rainforest, shrublands, temperate grasslands, savanna, desert, and tundra. And again, I'm not going to go over each one of those specifically just because we already have another stream where you can jump more into all of that. But in general, what's important about those different biomes is understanding what creates them. And it's really a combination of temperature and precipitation. And that temperature is created by varying levels of solar radiation. And so I'm going to throw another poll up here. This one, okay. All right, I'm going to open this next one here. So where is solar radiation the most direct? And is that going to be in the poles or the equator? I'll give it another second. All right, you guys are on this one. I'm going to go ahead and publish our results. 100% here in the equator, and that is absolutely right. So because of the shape of the Earth, we have the most direct sunlight hitting it on the equator, which again is the circle around the middle of the Earth, and the poles are going to have an indirect light hitting them. That indirect light is going to cause much less plant growth to occur and the temperature of those areas to be less. So in general, you'll notice if you look at the Earth that you're going to have the same type of ecosystems as you go out from the equator, kind of down to the poles. So you'll see the same things, a band of desert, a band of forest, on both directions as you go up and down from the equator. And let's see, I think I have one more question for you here. All right, let's try this one. An ecosystem with low precipitation, cold temperatures, and slow decomposition. Which one fits that description the best? Give it just another second to have some answers come on in. All right, it appears that we are a little torn on this one. All right, just one more minute if you have not cast a vote yet. Ooh, we're really torn on this one. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and publish the results of this guy. So a little bit torn. So we knew it's definitely not the rainforest, and that's correct. It is not the rainforest, but it's also not temperate forest. Temperate forests, think of temperate as being a good temperature. So they're right in the middle. You wouldn't necessarily call them cold temperatures. It might be cold there for a while, but like a little cold, not, really, really cold for a long time. So temperate is going to be kind of right in the middle. Good temperate forest would be East Coast forests, kind of like in the middle. So that would be like the Carolinas. Those are an example. The Blue Ridge Mountains, those are temperate forests. So yeah, it might get cold. It might snow a little bit, but not a lot. And then a chaparral. Chaparrals are areas that are in between it doesn't get enough rain to be a forest, but it gets more rain than a desert. So a chaparral are commonly found in California, kind of right off of the coast. Chaparrals are dry. They often catch on fire a lot, and they are actually pretty warm or temperate as well. So the correct answer is a boreal forest. Boreal forests are very cold for very much of the year, to the point where there's almost zero photosynthesis going on and zero decomposition, extremely cold temperatures, and they are pretty northernly forests. So again, that answer on that one, that slow decomposition is going to be caused by that really cold temperature and not a lot of rainfall, and that's in the boreal forest. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and get rid of that one. And let's jump into aquatic biomes. This is always my favorite thing to talk about. I originally went to school for marine biology, so I am a giant aquatic biome nerd, I would say. Aquatic biomes are, again, any water biome. They are characterized by conditions and locations of the water. So basically what kind of water it is, how's the water moving, is it warm water? All of those things are going to dictate what type of organism is going to be able to live in that area. So just going over some terms again here really quick. Freshwater is going to be anything without salt. And I know sometimes that can be confusing, that it's called freshwater. It doesn't have anything to do with how clean it is. Freshwater just means without salt. So any freshwater thing is going to be streams, rivers, ponds, and lakes. And again, freshwater is anything that's like on land that is going to not have salt. And then marine would be anything with salt. So that's your oceans, coral reefs, marshlands, and estuaries. And ocean environments change based on that, again, depth, temperature, and available nutrients. So the ocean itself has huge variations as far as where the nutrients is, and what type of organisms can live in those different areas. Areas that are very turbulent and able to have a lot of upwelling, where nutrients, and when we say nutrients, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but it's mostly we're talking about nitrogen and phosphorus. So when there's enough nitrogen and phosphorus, then you're going to have plant growth, which in the ocean is going to be algae. So anywhere where it's very turbulent and you're going to have a lot of upwelling, then that is going to cause a lot of plant growth. So off the coast of California, definitely on the west side of continents. So off the coast of California, anywhere where that water is going to be churning up a lot, you're going to have a lot of plant growth. And the opposite is going to happen on the kind of east side of continents. And an example of like the Great Barrier Reef, there is not a lot of upwelling. That water is almost completely clear, and there's not a lot of nutrients for organisms. And so that's why you have very tiny organisms. There's not a lot of potential for fishing in those areas. So that's kind of the major difference there. Let me check. I think I put a poll question up for this one, so let me just pull that up. Oh yeah, I did. Okay. Let's do another poll. All right, what aquatic ecosystem is known for being a place of reproduction and safety for many baby animals? Is that saltwater lakes, freshwater lakes, estuaries, or coral reefs? So baby animals, so that could be like little baby fish or baby birds. Give that just another second for me to answer that question. All right, I'm going to publish the results of this. And we are dead on. The correct answer is estuaries. I saw someone in the chat, let me double check that, mention, yeah, I guess they're talking about brackish water. Brackish water is a term for water that has a little bit of salt in it, basically, is what we're saying. So marine ecosystems are roughly around 3% salt, and so that would be like ocean. And again, it changes in different areas based on evaporation. So if you have an ocean that is kind of trapped, especially like a Gulf, the Baja, the Mexican, sorry, any part of the ocean that is trapped in like a fingerling is going to experience more evaporation, and then that's going to have greater amounts of salt water. But in general, it is about 3%. And then estuaries are places where fresh water and salt water mix. So where you're going to have a river coming out into the ocean, generally it splays out really big as it comes out, and you have kind of a giant area that is a little bit saltwater, a little bit freshwater, very muddy, tons of sunshine, tons of nutrients. And so you're going to have a lot of growth there as far as like baby fish, baby birds. A lot of sharks reproduce in those areas. So any estuary or marshland is often going to be really, really good for that reproduction of organisms. And they are often really valuable ecosystems too, as far as that mud that's there is really good at filtering the water and filtering out toxins. Oh, I saw someone ask that why is coral reefs wrong? So coral reefs are not, although there is a lot of growth there and a lot of different species of organisms that live there, they're not a specific place where other organisms go to reproduce. So like there might be clownfish that live there all of the time, and then they reproduce. So there's a lot of reproduction at a coral reef because there's a lot of animals at a coral reef. But an estuary is animals will specifically go there to have their babies. And so in an estuary, you might have a bird migration come through where 100,000 cranes go to that estuary specifically to have their babies and then leave. Same thing with the fish. A lot of times sharks will swim into estuaries to have their babies and then they'll leave again. So that's kind of the difference. It's whether or not they are specifically going there to reproduce, or there's a lot of reproduction just because there's a lot of animals in any one area. All right, let me remove that poll. Okay, so we kind of are leaving the talk of biomes and ecosystems now, and we're going to talk a little bit more about cycles. And I think cycles is something where students often feel confused, and they are very in depth, and you can talk about cycling of nutrients and the chemistry of what's going on and get really into it. And I think a lot of people get lost and confused, and it doesn't have to be that way. So I think that just understanding in general what's going on with these cycles, and the most important part is how these cycles are impacted by humans and why it's important to understand what's going on here is more important than really, being able to draw the cycle out and all the different stages and all that stuff. So we're going to do just kind of like in general, why are these so important and how it might come up on the test. So starting with the carbon cycle, carbon makes up all living things and is constantly cycling via combustion and metabolism and photosynthesis. So combustion and metabolism are the same idea. One is the idea of like eating something and your body burning it and that energy being released in heat and motion as you are a person moving around or an organism moving around. And combustion is really the same chemical equation. It's just the idea of fire. So instead of like the most simple way of thinking it, instead of like eating leaves and using that energy to like run around and do stuff and give off heat, you could burn those leaves and it would give off heat in the same kind of amount of energy either way. So that's kind of how combustion and metabolism are the same idea as far as the carbon cycle. And then the opposite side of that would be photosynthesis, and that is when a plant is taking carbon that is in the air and converting it into a body that is storing it. So carbon is stored in organisms, beginning with the process of photosynthesis. So a plant is growing and it is pulling that carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in its body. And so you'll have plants growing. And then carbon is released via combustion or metabolism or cellular respiration. So that is a constant circle that's going on. Plants grow, organisms eat the plant, or the plant is burned, and then that carbon is released back into the atmosphere. So that is just the very most simplest way of thinking about the carbon cycle and how it moves around. And so to complicate it a little bit, carbon can be stored in what's called a sink. So let's imagine an entire forest, a huge area of trees that are pulling that carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in their bodies, in their leaves, and in that hard kind of, think about it as like, I guess biomass is a good word for it. So storing it in biomass. And then that can be created as a sink, as those trees may not be consumed by organisms and they may not be burned, and they being consumed by organisms would also be like decomposition. So let's say all of those trees just fell down on the ground and stayed there and didn't change. Over time, biomass would no longer look like trees. It would turn into fossil fuels. So that would be oil, methane, or coal. And that's how they can be stored. So within the earth, there are these giant sinks of fossil fuels. And that is places where their entire forests have been covered up by dirt and then compacted together, and that would create the oil, methane, or coal that is a sink of that energy. And so then that's where humans come along and can mess up the natural carbon cycle by burning those sinks and releasing it back into the air. So if we can find, a pocket of oil in the earth that is equal to 10 million trees that have been compacted into coal, we could burn those, and that would be, releasing the carbon from 10 million trees back into the atmosphere. And it would take 10 million trees to grow again in order to pull that back out. And often a huge sink for carbon is actually in the ocean. So a lot of carbon is absorbed by plankton in the ocean. And then as they die or are eaten by other animals that then themselves die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean, bringing that carbon with it. So a lot of, when we talk about offsetting carbon footprint and how are we going to, remove carbon from the atmosphere, a lot of that idea would be that it is going to be pulled into the ocean, and that would be the greatest way to sink that back into the earth. And a lot of times when people are thinking of ideas on how to offset climate change, they will throw out the idea of boosting photosynthesis in the ocean. And so again, we go back to that idea of a limiting factor. And a lot of times in the ocean, the limiting factor is obviously not going to be water, because there's a lot of water. And most of the time it's not sunlight, because there's a lot of available sunlight as well. It would be that nutrients. So if you added a ton of phosphorus and nitrogen into the ocean, you would have a ton of plant growth, and then those plants would die and sink to the bottom, taking carbon with them. So it's kind of an offshoot, but that is very simply what the carbon cycle is, and how humans can kind of offset that. Next one we're going to talk about is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is a necessary nutrient for plant growth and is primarily found as a gas in the atmosphere. So nitrogen is the most abundant gas in our atmosphere. It's not oxygen. And it is, as a gas in the atmosphere, it is not accessible to plants. So plants cannot pull that in and be able to use that freely. So they have to go through this process, which requires a lot of different kind of organisms in order to help them to pull that nitrogen into a form that they can use in their bodies. So nitrogen fixation, that is the process when a bacteria in the soil converts ammonia into a form that is suitable for plants to use. And that's really the biggest kind of part that we need to understand about the nitrogen cycle as far as how it works naturally. And the biggest thing as far as how humans are going to impact it is the use of fertilizers. And so again, humans, if we want to grow large amounts of plants really, really quickly, we need to identify what is that limiting factor and then provide that. So a lot of times in farms, we can get them more water through irrigation, and there's abundant sunlight usually where we are creating farms. So then that brings nutrients. And so we have to apply fertilizers to plants to allow them to grow. Phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is often the limiting factor of growth in many ecosystems and is stored mostly in rocks. So again, phosphorus is a limiting factor in plant growth, and it is used in fertilizers. Phosphorus and nitrogen is what we do put on farms to increase plant growth. Both of these, that's kind of why I went together. So both of these chemicals, when we add them to the environment, we're not going to have 100% absorption by the plants in a farm. There's always going to be some that runs off. So how that runoff would happen is very simply, we add these chemicals to a farm. The next time it rains, it's going to wash away from the farm and get into local waterways. And then from there, it's going to have the exact same effect that we would want it to have in a farm, but it's just going to happen in the wild areas. So you're going to have eutrophication happen. And what that is when you do get these fertilizers into natural waterways, the algae that lives there, and remember, algae is just a plant. Algae is an aquatic plant. A lot of times algae is just a single cell that reproduces. Sometimes it's a strand of cells. Sometimes algae is it looks like a vascular plant. So you'd have like kelp, which is just a giant algae. So again, algae is just a plant. It's just like an aquatic plant. It can't stand up. It doesn't have a vascular system like a tree does or anything. But sometimes people think algae is really gross, but it's just a plant that lives in the water. Anyway, so when you have these fertilizers, excessive fertilizers go in the water, then you're going to have these plants grow out of control. And so that's what's going on in our picture here. This little river is definitely eutrophied. It is having a huge amount of plant growth. Eventually, the plants are going to eat all of the nutrients that have been introduced there, and then you're going to have a massive die-off, and all of that biomass is going to, like we said before, sink to the bottom and is going to decompose. When things decompose, decomposition is just metabolism, a regular form of metabolism. So you're going to have that CO2 be released. And so this little river here that we're showing, you're having like a massive bloom of plants. They're creating a ton of oxygen. Everything's really happy. Then they're going to die off. And that decomposition, when they all sink to the bottom and die, is going to cause a ton of carbon dioxide to be released into this little river. And we call that hypoxic condition. So it's going to have no oxygen or lack of oxygen in the water. And then all of the little fishies and invertebrates that live there are not going to be able to survive that. And they are going to, end up dying. And the largest case of eutrophication, or like the biggest example that's often used, is the Gulf of Mexico. So if you look at the Mississippi River and the Mississippi River delta and all of the water that is being drained down that river, it's just massive amounts of farms. So there's so much potential for nitrogen and phosphorus to go into that water that by the time it gets all the way down the US and into the ocean, it causes a huge algal bloom and eutrophication. And so the Gulf of Mexico has a massive, what's called as a dead zone, an area where fish no longer can live because of the hypoxic conditions or lack of oxygen. And someone asked if it can occur naturally, and it absolutely can occur naturally. Phosphorus is found in rocks. So if there is some sort of a geological event, let's say like an earthquake that exposed new rocks or a volcanic eruption, and then rainfall and natural leaching of those chemicals would cause it. But that is very rare, considering, you'd have to have like all of these things happen at once. And yeah, it might happen if you have like a newly exposed geologic area. But so for the most part, no. Eutrophication is going to be something where humans have mined for phosphorus and then dumped a whole bunch of it on a farm, and that's what caused it. And the water cycle. So this is one I'm not going to spend too much time on because I'm sure that you are familiar with it and in general how it works. So this is just water moving around the earth. And it can be solid, liquid, or in gas forms. The water cycle is powered by the sun. So the sun is going to start this process by evaporation and heating up the water. And then temperature differences caused by the sun is going to cause clouds to move around, and it's going to cause weather events where that water is going to be, or that ice, snow, or whatever it is going to be dumped on the land. And then it is going to move its way back towards the ocean eventually. So it's kind of a large circle. The most important thing we got to know here is that there is not very much fresh water. And again, fresh water is water without salt and water that we can drink. This diagram is kind of tricky to understand, I guess. So if you look all the way on the left, so the one that says oceans, that is, like, just ignore the other two for now. That is all the water on the earth. And so oceans are 96.5% of our water that's on the earth. And that is all salt water that can't be used by, animals and plants on land. And then the freshwater is just 2.5%. So if you're like, okay, well, 2.5% is available drinking water, but that's not true. So the next column, the middle column, is just looking at the amount of freshwater and where that's located. And if you look at that closely, the majority of freshwater is in the ice caps. So it's frozen. We can't get to it. We can't use it. And then 30% is in groundwater. So groundwater can be accessed if we drill wells in order to get to it. But only 1.2% is what we call available fresh water. So that is water that is like we can use for drinking water. And that 1.2%, is just a tiny amount when you consider that that's what we need to use for drinking. That's how we use irrigation on growing all of our crops. That's natural lakes that are used for recreation as well. So just a really tiny amount of water is available, fresh water. And that's important too when we start to get into water pollution and dumping massive amounts of chemicals into that teeny tiny amount of water that is available for drinking. All right, and let's talk quickly about primary productivity. Primary productivity is plants converting solar energy into organic materials. So that's kind of going back to that carbon cycle. That's why we needed that foundation to understand where that carbon is going and why that is important. And primary productivity is, again, so this is anytime photosynthesis is happening. So this is plants absorbing that energy coming from the sun and turning it into biomass that other organisms can then eat, or it can be a sink and go back down into the earth to be stored. Gross primary productivity is the total rate of photosynthesis happening, and net primary productivity is the amount that's stored. And I know that sounds confusing, but let's think of it as if it was a paycheck. So gross primary productivity is going to be how much you're paid. So let's say you're paid $10 an hour, but your net primary productivity is going to be how much do you actually get to take home. And let's say you pay 30% in taxes, your net primary productivity would be your $7 that actually you get to put in your bank account. And that is saying plants use energy in order to store and make more biomass. So not all energy that they absorb is actually converted into biomass. Some of it is burned up. You think of that as like the tax that doesn't actually get to come home. And the oceans are a huge area where there is a lot of primary productivity. So there's a lot of plant growth, and oftentimes we don't think about that. So let's see. Let's open one more poll. So complete this statement for me. More oxygen is generated from all of the plants on land or all of the phytoplankton in the ocean. Awesome. One more minute to get your vote in on this one. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and publish those results. You guys did that really well on that. So it is true that there is more productivity in the oceans than on land. There's just so much more space in the oceans. And again, that's in the first 100 meters. The reason for that first 100 meters or the depth is that the ocean is so deep that light doesn't get down to the bottom. So just in an area where there is light, and the amount of light that can travel down into the ocean varies in different parts of the ocean based on how much nutrients or particles are in the ocean that's going to absorb that light and stop it. So some areas the light can go down a little bit farther than in others. But in general, anywhere in the ocean that has light in it, you're going to have productivity from plankton. And it is absolutely massive. As in this picture, you can see it from space. When you have a ton of nutrients coming into the ocean, you're going to have a giant natural algal bloom and a lot of algae growing. And then that typically follows suit right after that. There's a lot of fish that can eat that algae directly, and then a lot of biomass right from that. So a lot of different organisms are able to benefit from that. All right, let's keep going here. Trophic levels is energy flowing from one organism to the next as they are consumed. One of the biggest things here that's always on the test is when you're looking at those diagrams that show trophic levels or show food webs, the direction of the arrows is very important. The direction of the arrow is the direction of energy. So in this image, if you were going to draw that in a diagram, you would draw the arrow going from this dead fox to the eagle. It's important to show where the energy is going. All right, so this is looking at an energy pyramid and how energy moves in the ecosystem and at what efficiency rate. And so energy moves up at a rate of 10% on each level or each trophic level, and 90% of it is lost as heat. So the difference here really between energy and matter is that matter is going to constantly be flowing in a cycle. We don't lose matter from the planet unless we lose it by launching a Tesla out into space. That is matter that is now lost forever. But energy is lost. So energy comes in from the sun and then is lost as heat back out into space. So we are losing that energy. And as an organism, you are constantly burning energy and losing it as heat. The energy pyramid is also, very similar to the biomass pyramid and showing how much energy or biomass moves up each trophic level. As organisms consume other organisms. Oops, let me go back really quick. So that's something else that is often on the test that we need to kind of understand. So we're going to look at this diagram a little bit more here. And if you look at the red numbers or percentages as it moves up, you can see that it loses 10% of that total energy as it's going in each step. And the same thing would be, or roughly the same thing for biomass as you move up. And then each different level would be a different trophic level. So let's put some examples to that so it makes a little bit more sense. So let's imagine just those top two tiers of this pyramid might be corn being the first, like a primary producer, and then a cow eating that. So a cow would be that primary consumer, the first organism. And then as a human, you might be that secondary consumer that is, eating the cow. So as far as biomass and energy, to get 1 pound of beef, you would roughly need about 10 pounds of corn in order to generate that. And so a 2-stage or 3-stage energy pyramid or biomass pyramid would be fairly efficient, not the best. So another way to think of that as far as like sustainability would be, would you rather have 1 pound of beef or 10 pounds of corn to eat? And I know that a lot of us would probably say like the beef, because then we can make burgers. But environmentally, it would make more sense to eat the 10 pounds of corn, because that is just a lot more food. And instead of wasting that food on a cow to get that 1 pound of beef, it would be more food that way. And where this gets really tricky is if you are looking at eating organisms that are not just the second level on an energy pyramid, but they're like the 10th level or something, and where those exist, and how much energy it goes into making that. So again, let's use a example here, so that we can kind of put that somewhere. It's hard to think about without an example. Bluefin tuna is a really good example. I think that, sometimes it's on a menu and it would be nothing for people to eat that, and they don't even think about where it came from or what it took to build that organism, and how special it really is. But so that bluefin tuna might have had to eat a herring, which had to eat an anchovy, which ate some zooplankton, which ate phytoplankton, in order for you to eat it. So if you backtrack that, in order to get your 1 pound of bluefin tuna, you might need 10 pounds of herring and 100 pounds of anchovies and 1,000 pounds of zooplankton and 10,000 pounds of plankton in order to have that one bluefin steak for dinner. So it's really important, environmentally speaking, to look at these different levels of consumption and what it would take in order to generate that food, as far as energy and biomass in the environment. Can you imagine your dinner that you ate, your one piece of fish, could have been 10,000 pounds of phytoplankton in order to generate it. So as far as looking at what is sustainable to eat, it's really important to look at these different levels of consumption and how much energy was lost in order to generate it. Okay, so I know that was a ton of information. Before we take off here, I have a few more things. Again, remember to follow us on our social medias, and the most important here is to jump into Discord to continue talking. We're going to be there, and Miriam's going to be there for the next half hour to answer any questions that came up during this stream. But in addition to just kind of answering questions of what we talked about, I would love feedback on what you guys want me to talk about next time. So let me throw up one more poll here. Again, the next one is going to be Unit 2. These are 4 major concepts in Unit 2. Which one do you think you need the most help on? And I will focus on that most for next time. And again, I don't know if it might be cutting some of them off for you. So it's biodiversity, ecosystem tolerance, adaptations, or ecological succession. All right, let me go ahead and publish these results real quick, so you can see what everyone else said too. So we will definitely spend some time talking about ecological succession and why that happens and the different types. But it was great to have everyone be here tonight. Go ahead and hide this. And again, go ahead and jump on Discord to talk about how the session went and anything that you want to learn about more next time.